All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to examine our global climate data through the lens of a pretty fascinating story. Let me introduce you to Richard Carter. Richard was a 50-year-old billionaire living in New Jersey, and he owned this absolutely massive, incredibly successful company. I mean, he had it all, right? The luxury cars, the enormous mansion, the works. But he was missing one absolutely crucial thing: kindness. He underpaid his workers, constantly refused to help them out, and fundamentally believed that money was just more important than people. Now, Richard's story isn't just some cautionary fable, because as we're going to see today, his fatal business flaw perfectly mirrors humanity's systemic, extractive approach to our global economy and the environment. Let's unpack the data.
So, years pass, and Richard basically thinks he's invincible. He looks down on anyone who isn't wealthy. But then, completely out of nowhere, a massive crisis strikes. A competitor enters the market, contracts get canceled left and right, and Richard starts losing millions of dollars. He's sitting alone on a park bench, completely helpless, when a humble, elderly poor man approaches him. At first, Richard literally scoffs at the guy, judging him entirely by his worn-out clothes. But eventually, desperate and having lost all his pride, Richard actually listens. The old man reveals that he, too, had once lost a hugely successful company for one simple reason, and he delivers this devastating quote. "You built your business on money instead of people." He told Richard, unhappy employees create poor products, which leads to a poor reputation. Your workers don't support your company because you've never supported them.
Now, here's why this matters to us. Richard's failing strategy maps perfectly to our current global climate efforts. When his business started collapsing, he hired all these wildly expensive consultants, but nothing worked because the core system itself was broken. It's the exact same story with our planet. Recent data from the World Resources Institute actually shows that despite our high-level climate goals, fundamental transitions have alarmingly stalled out. For example, private passenger cars still account for about half of all kilometers traveled globally. And believe it or not, that share is actually increasing. On top of that, energy efficiency improvements in buildings have slowed down, and we've made almost zero dent in our goal to have food loss and waste by 2030. We're essentially applying really expensive band-aids while the actual structural foundation is cracking underneath us.
Section 1. Wisdom of the Humble. Unexpected Solutions. So how exactly do we fix a broken system? The old man told Richard, sometimes wisdom comes from places people don't expect. Let's see how that applies to our global climate response.
Just as Richard had to swallow his pride and actually listen to a poor man on a park bench, global policymakers are finally recognizing that some of the most crucial climate wisdom lies with marginalized voices. The IPCC Synthesis Report and the Global Study on Indigenous Peoples explicitly highlight this fact. The data consistently shows that when we engage indigenous peoples and local communities through rights-based, collective decision-making, we actually accelerate climate action. It unlocks a much deeper, far more effective ambition than just relying on top-down, bureaucratic approaches alone.
So, the takeaway here is that we desperately need foundational fixes. Richard couldn't just stand up and give a quick motivational speech to save his company. He needed a fundamental shift in his core values. Globally, this kind of shift is represented by the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Framework for Nature-Based Solutions, or NBS, along with regenerative agriculture. These aren't temporary consulting tricks. These are profound, deep, structural shifts that address climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity loss all at the exact same time.
To really wrap your head around just how powerful these natural solutions are, we need to look at this number: 0.4%. There's this incredible global initiative called 4 per 1,000, and it suggests that increasing global soil organic carbon stocks by just 0.4% annually, specifically by using regenerative agriculture practices, could completely offset our current anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Let that sink in for a second. The Earth's soil holds roughly 1,500 gigatons of carbon just in the top meter globally. A tiny 0.4% systematic shift in how we treat the Earth yields these absolutely massive stabilizing dividends.
Section 2. Rewiring our systems, from the workplace to the grid. After his profound realization on that park bench, Richard didn't sleep a wink. The very next morning, he gathered all his employees, admitted he was wrong, and completely overhauled his toxic workplace. Now let's look at how we need to do the exact same thing to our electrical grids and material economies.
The crazy thing is, when you finally overhaul a broken system, doing the right thing often makes total financial sense. Take a look at the McKinsey carbon cost abatement curve. Notice that massive section of the data dropping below the zero line? That indicates that nearly half of all CO2 reductions, which mostly come from efficiency measures, can actually be achieved at a negative cost. The energy savings literally more than pay for the cost of the measure over its lifetime. Just as Richard learned that investing in his employees paid massive financial dividends down the road, investing in energy efficiency literally pays for itself.
But here's the catch. To rewire the system, you have to communicate effectively. Richard finally started listening to his workers, right? Well, in our energy systems, we need to talk to consumers. Data from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory proves that adding consumer feedback systems to the smart grid drastically changes human behavior. But it has to be done right. It absolutely must use actual usage data, and it needs to be frequent. Actually, daily feedback works vastly better than weekly. Plus, it should involve goal setting. When you implement that kind of feedback loop correctly, it yields end-use energy savings anywhere between 5 and 20%, with a median of 6%.
We also have to completely rewire how we consume physical goods, moving far away from Richard's old take-and-discard mentality. The European Environment Agency outlines a brilliant three-step circular economy model for this. Step 1 is before use. We minimize resource inputs right from the start through smart design. Step 2 is during use. We actively extend product lifetimes through repair and shared use. And step 3 is after use. We aggressively recycle to close the loop entirely. This methodology prevents the relentless, damaging extraction of raw materials, which, by the way, currently accounts for about 55% of all global greenhouse gas emissions.
And what's the actual impact of adopting that circular model? Try 33%. The EEA evaluated over 131 recent studies and found that, on average, fully implementing circular economy measures globally could deliver a 33% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And in specific sectors like waste management, that reduction leaps to a staggering average of 52%. It's a real game changer.
Section 3. Valuing the true costs. Accounting for what matters. Back in New Jersey, Richard Carter stood before his highly skeptical employees with tears in his eyes. He announced salary increases, created new support programs, and improved working conditions. For the first time in his life, Richard was accurately accounting for the true costs of running a sustainable business. Let's look at how we can measure true costs in our global economy.
The old saying is true. You can't manage what you don't measure. Today, we have sophisticated tools like the CMAP platform, which institutions use to rigorously calculate their carbon footprints. It places a really heavy emphasis on accurate, supplier-specific emission factors for Scope 2 electricity use. But simply measuring isn't enough. We absolutely must pair that strict measurement with real economic accountability. We have to hold polluters accountable for what they emit.
The ultimate tool for this accountability is carbon pricing. It's essentially an economic mechanism that charges emitters a fee for the tons of greenhouse gases they release into the atmosphere. Now, you might be wondering, won't that just push polluting businesses to move to countries with weaker rules? It's a concept critics call carbon leakage. Well, data from a global evaluation by the IFO Institute proves otherwise. Their analysis of the dynamic treatment effects shows that carbon pricing effectively stabilizes global emissions over time without any statistically significant carbon leakage. The negative spillovers are basically negligible. Long story short, it works.
Section 4. Redefining true wealth, a sustainable future. Let's bring this whole thing together. Because Richard genuinely changed his ways, his workplace atmosphere completely transformed. Workers became motivated, productivity soared, and within just 2 years, his company was thriving again, stronger than ever before. It serves as a perfect metaphor for what a restored, regenerative planet could look like. I want to pause right here and just ask you, what is the true measure of wealth? Seriously, when we look at our economies, our local businesses, and our global climate policies, are we measuring success by short-term extraction, or are we measuring it by long-term vitality?
As you can see, when you choose the long-term structural approach, you unlock these incredible cascading benefits. In Richard's business, highly motivated workers led to increased productivity, which led to returning customers and eventually a much stronger reputation. In our climate, regenerative agriculture leads to thriving soil ecosystems that naturally enhances carbon sequestration, which regenerates our natural resources and ultimately builds sustainable global economies. The data is clear. Long-term value creation will always beat short-term extraction. Years later, Richard actually returned to that park hoping to thank the old man, but he was nowhere to be found. Instead, Richard found a tiny note tucked beneath the bench. It simply read, "True wealth is not measured by how much money you keep, but by how many lives you improve." It's a profound lesson, and one that Richard never forgot. As we design our smart grids, implement global carbon pricing, and shift toward a circular economy, this exact wisdom needs to be the foundation of our climate response. Are we building our future on money, or are we building it on people? Think about that as you go through your week. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.